Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank colleagues in the other place for the work they have done in strengthening this bill. The changes made there go some way towards what we should all be aiming for: safer communities, stronger laws and real protections for the public. During the committee stage, we saw the government repeatedly reject important amendments from members on this side of the House on fly tipping, pornography and increasing sentences for knife crime. Indeed, this bill could also have provided a real opportunity to tackle the scourge of off-road bikes, to support this country's tradesmen with real action on tool theft, and to remove yet more knives from our streets by increasing stop and search. Whilst the government has failed to take up some of these opportunities, I'm delighted to see they've U-turned on some of the measures Labour MPs previously voted against. While that may be a familiar pattern, it's still right to welcome the fact that they've recognised the value of some of those proposals. Take fly tipping. Giving courts the power to issue penalty points to offenders is a straightforward, common-sense step. If someone uses a vehicle to dump waste and blight our communities, it's entirely right that their ability to drive should be affected. Likewise, even though I would have liked the government to accept a more significant penalty proposed in Amendment 15, it's a welcome step that the government has recognised the seriousness of the crime when there is an additional element of intent to use unlawful violence, which rightly should have a greater penalty when compared to possession-only offences. It's right that these measures have progressed, even though a great deal of unfortunate wrangling and rejection occurred before they were incorporated into the bill. On that note, I'd like to turn to the proposals the government has chosen not to accept from colleagues across the way. I'd ask that members of this House give serious consideration to measures which enhance the powers of the police forces and improve their ability to keep our communities safe. Fly tipping. For instance, as I've mentioned, members of this House do not need to be reminded of the scourge of fly tipping. We all recognise how adverse its impact can be on our neighbourhoods. On Sunday, I saw an appalling incident in my constituency with a huge volume of waste dumped near Sadburge, with appalling consequences for our environment, for wildlife and for anybody who wants to enjoy the countryside. Amendment 6 would ensure the guidance issued about the enforcement of offences under Section 33 makes clear that, where a person is convicted of a relevant offence, they are liable for the costs incurred through loss or damage resulting from that offence. As the government is already setting out guidance in the legislation, why would it not make sure that this guidance is unequivocal? That where a person is convicted of fly tipping, they, not the victims, are responsible for the costs incurred as a result of their offence. Furthermore, Amendment 11 will further enable the police to seize vehicles on an issue where there is universal acceptance of the need to do more. We should ensure... I will.
He's making a very important point, especially since, given the role of criminal organisations in fly tipping now, the costs can be hundreds of thousands of pounds to landowners who are innocent victims of this crime. And really, if the government is serious about dealing with fly tipping, then it's got to ensure that the sanctions are such that there's a deterrent.
I couldn't agree more. I think we see a selfish, mindless minority, small minority of people who incur huge costs on taxpayers across the country, who do huge damage to our communities. It's right that the sanctions should match that. On an issue where there is universal acceptance of the need to do more, we should ensure that there are no unnecessary restrictions on our authorities in cracking down on these offences. Removing the instrument... I will.
Fly tipping is very important, but can I refer him to a matter of life and death, and it relates directly to Amendment 361. And this, as a result of these amendments, somebody who procures a very late-term abortion illegally will receive a free pardon. And can I refer my honourable friend to Mr Justice Cook, who said in the Sarah Cat case that Cat had robbed the baby of the life it was about to have, and said the seriousness of the crime lay between manslaughter and murder. Sentencing, the judge told Cat she clearly thought the man with whom she was having an affair was a father, and she had shown no remorse. Is it just not a terrible indictment of our society that human life can be taken, about to be born, at 39 weeks, and there should be a free pardon of a very serious case.
Matt Vickers.
I share his concerns. I think many people across the country share his concerns, not only about the issue, and however strongly people might feel about it, but also about the way that it was added into this bill after the committee stage, meaning that some of the scrutiny that might otherwise have happened, no evidence given at the evidence sessions in relation to it, it was slipped in here, and I don't think that there was adequate scrutiny of it, and I think lots of people across the country agree with that concern. Something so seismic in changing the relationship between the state and individuals should have had more scrutiny in this place. With regards to fly tipping, I believe that removing the instrument of this crime is an effective tool, and it could extend beyond the legislative framework set out by the government in the Waste Crime Action Plan. However, the measures brought forward are not merely limited to the issues of fly tipping. There are important proposals relating to matters such as non-crime hate incidents, with other colleagues in the other place wisely taking the step in Amendment 334 to end the investigation and recording of non-hate crime incidents and ensure that any future incident recording guidance has due regard to the right of freedom of expression. This is a sensible, necessary measure, as the government's current proposal appears to be a rebranding of the existing scheme with a more restrictive triage system. Reports would still be logged, personal data still recorded, and disclosure rules unchanged. Officers and staff will still be tied up monitoring incidents that do not meet the criminal threshold at a cost in time and resources. As Lord Hogan Howe told the Lords, we need to move on from the recording of non-crime hate incidents by removing them altogether from police systems. I'm afraid that unless we pass this amendment, we will risk returning to this issue in the future. It's estimated that 660 hours of police time has been spent on non-crime hate incidents. We can change that and see that time invested back into policing our communities. On antisocial behaviour and illicit retailers, we hear repeatedly from businesses and local communities about rogue premises causing persistent problems on our high streets. If we're serious about supporting the police to do their jobs, we must ensure they have the power they need to tackle not just crime, but the wider public nuisance and disorder that too often accompanies it. A range of organisations, including the Chartered Trading Standards Institute, have been clear that stronger powers are needed to deal with rogue retailers. While the current legal framework does provide tools, in practice they are too often insufficient. The time limits attached to closure notices and orders simply do not go far enough. What we see instead is a revolving door. Offenders wait out short closure periods, reopen under a different name, and continue their activities, sometimes shifting location, before enforcement agencies have the chance to complete proper investigations. That is the crux of the problem. The system does not enable action that sticks. And in the meantime, the impact is clear. Our high streets suffer as legitimate businesses lose trade and confidence declines. Responsible retailers who follow the rules and invest in their communities are left competing against those who operate with impunity. There is also a wider impact on our communities, particularly on young people. Premises linked to this kind of activity can become focal points for antisocial behaviour, drawing in vulnerable individuals and exposing them to harm. If we want safer streets, stronger communities, we cannot allow that cycle to continue. Amendment 333 offers a practical solution. It would extend the timeframe for enforcement, giving agencies the ability to take action that is thorough, proportionate and crucially effective. This is about ensuring that when action is taken, it delivers real results, not just temporary disruption. In upholding public safety, we must update the law to reflect the current nature of the crimes that our society faces. Amendment 311 reflects the worrying growth we've seen in the number of protest groups who engage in serious criminal activity to further their aims. However, as organisations, they're often shielded from the full force of the law, as was set out in the other House. This designation is not terrorist prescription. It would aim to restrict membership, promotion, fundraising, organising and material support, with proportionate penalties less than those that a prescribed terrorist group would attract. While I understand the government believes it to be premature because of its ongoing review, it's acted for understandable reasons regarding cumulative disruption. Therefore, why should that not be extended to this provision to ensure there are restrictions on organisations whose purpose is to break the law? When we consider extreme ideologies, the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Foreign Secretary have been clear that the Conservative Party would work with the Government to prescribe the IRGC. It's apparent to many members across the House and our counterparts in the EU that the threat posed by the RGC is real. However, despite comments made while in opposition, measures from the Government have not been forthcoming. Lord's Amendment 359.
He's talking about the prescription of the IRGC. Can you just explain to the House why in 14 years the Tory party didn't do that?
As the opposition at the time was telling us, they had really strong views about it. They're now in government and they're not doing anything about it. But do you know what? He need not worry about another day or another week. He has the opportunity today to vote for Lord's Amendment 359, an opportunity to set this process in motion. It's not enough that Iran is covered by the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme. We must go further. The IRGC is not a theoretical concern, but as my colleagues have repeatedly stressed to the Government, it has threatened those in our country and supported armed groups that have killed British and Allied troops. We welcome the Government adopting the amendment put forward by the Honourable Member for Gosport and Rutland and Stamford to address the depiction of strangulation in pornography. I understand that through discussions with Baroness Burton on the related subjects, the Government has undertaken to separately progress further specific measures to tackle 18-plus step incest, where family of one party knew one party as a child, the mimicking of children 16-plus, and the age verification in pornography. I would be grateful if the Minister might offer further clarity in her comments on those specifics. I'd like to put on the record my party's opposition to Lord's Amendment 301, which unnecessarily expands the definition of aggravated offences to include certain characteristics, despite existing law already covering most of these factors at sentencing and providing extensive hate crime protections. The change has been introduced late in the legislative process with minimal scrutiny, raising concerns about transparency. Expert advice from the Law Commission has warned that including sex as a protected characteristic in this setting could be ineffective and even counterproductive, potentially complicating prosecutions and creating hierarchies of victims. Overall, the amendment appears more symbolic than practical, adding complexity without clear benefit to crime reduction. The Government has before it amendments that would strengthen our legal system and better protect the public and the police, but we cannot ignore the reality on the ground. Officer numbers have fallen while demand continues to rise, and this bill will add to that pressure. That's why it matters that when the police act, they can use the full weight of the law. Without the right powers, higher expectations mean little. Where disorder takes hold, it damages communities and undermines confidence, as we've seen in places like Clapham Common. While parts of the bill are welcome, there are still gaps. These amendments would strengthen enforcement and support officers. If we're serious about safer streets, removing them risks falling short of what the public expects. Thank you.